group data. In statistics, data are presented in different forms, either in the group form or the ungroup form. We have the group data and the ungroup data. And when working on group data and ungroup data, there are different formulas that are applied to work on what group data and ungroup data. When we talk about ungroup data, we talk about set of data presented in their raw form. Set of data was presented with their what raw form. This is an example of group data. These are what set of data that are presented in their what raw form. These numbers here can be used to represent the age of set of persons. Let's say we have different numbers of persons and these are their various ages. This what you are seeing now, this data now, they are not organized. They are not what organized. So we call it what ungroup what data. They are not organized. But when we talk of something of this nature, this is a group data. When we talk about group data, a group data is a set of data arranged into classes. They arrange what into what classes. So when we talk about group data, what you have to know that they are arranged into what classes. Then we have our class interval, class mark, and others. So this one is a what group data. Why this previous one is what ungroup data. For ungroup data, it is very difficult to compute the mean, the median, and the mode when the data size is very large. When the data size is very large, when we talk about data size being large, we simply refer to a situation where the amount of data that is to be used for computation is very many. So we have a very large data size here. To compute the mean for this set of data is very much, it will be quite difficult to compute. We know the formula of mean is equal to summation s all over n for ungroup data. So to compute the mean for this ungroup data is quite difficult. That's why it becomes necessary to use group data. So I told that group data is arranging set of data into class size, class interval, which is being defined by the class size. I have used some concept here, such as class interval, class size. What is the meaning of class interval and class size? Okay, I will give you the meaning of some concept used in statistics, especially statistics 2, talk about what group data. We have what our frequency table, we have class interval, class boundary, class mark. These are some of the concepts that are frequently used in grouping data. You need to know each of these concepts and have a thorough knowledge of it because they are highly required in grouping of data. Okay, let's talk about the frequency table. When we talk about the frequency table, we talk about a tabular arrangement of data into classes together with their corresponding frequency. A frequency table talk about a tabular arrangement of data into classes together with their corresponding frequency. What we have here is a frequency table. This is a frequency table. It shows the mass of students in kilogram arranged into a particular class size. Look at it. What we have here, this is these are referred to the mass of students. They are arranged into class size. This is what we call frequency table. Frequency table talk about classes and frequency. Classes and frequency. So this is a class. Let's assume that a student that weighs 40 to 42 kg. This is the class for them. Why those that weigh 43 to 45? This is the class for them. Why those that weigh 46 to 48? This is the class for them. So these are classes. And why these are the frequency? These are the frequencies. If you check your results, you will usually see grading pattern. You will see distinction 95 to 100, excellent 90 to 94. Those are classes. Distinction 90 to 95 to 100. That is a class. For you to be among those students that is being recorded as scoring distinction, you must have scored between 95 to 100. So that 95 to 100 is called the class of distinction. Then we have those that I refer as poor, between 0 to what 45. Those are referred to as what poor. So any student that score between 0 to 45 is fall into the classes of what poor in that word particular subject or examination. Why the number, talk about the number of students that falls into this word class of 40 to 45. So from our example here, between 43 to 45 kilogram, 18 students are into that class. That is, we have 18 students that score that has between 43 to 45 kilogram. Between 46 to 48 kilogram, we have what 42 students that have such a weight. So when we talk about frequency table, we're talking about arrangement of what data into their various what classes together with their corresponding what frequency. So this data we have here can be arranged into a frequency distribution word table. But we will look at that as we proceed. We will arrange this data into a frequency distribution table as we proceed. Then we have another concept, class interval. Class what? Interval. When we talk about class interval, we talk about a number or symbol that represents a particular class or define a class. We talk about a number or symbol that would represent a class or define a word class. From this example we have on our screen, 40 to 42 is referred to as the word class interval. Class what? Interval. That class interval indicates the number of what a particular student that must be in this class must have a mass of what 40 to what 42 kilogram. Anybody that does not have such a weight cannot be in that word class. So the class interval is what used to what define a word class. So your result, distinction of 45 to 100. So anybody that scored below 95 to 100, any student that scored below 95 is not what part of what that word class of what distinction. So that 95 to 100 is what the class word interval of this class. Then we have 46 to 48, 49 to 51. These are what various word class word interval. For you to be in a particular class, you must fall into the range of the word numbers that make up that word class. The other class interval, we have the upper class interval and the lower class word interval. We have the upper class interval and the lower class word interval. The lower class interval tells us the least number or item that can fall into a particular class. The lower class interval tells us the least item or number that can fall into a particular class. So let us take the first class here. This is our first class. Let's take this one as our first class. This 40 is the lower class interval. It tells us the least number that can be put into that class. That the least number is 40. 39 cannot fall into this class. 38 cannot fall into the class because the lower class interval is 40. In the second class, let's look at the second class. The second class is 43 to 45. This 43 is referred to as the lower class interval of that class. The least number that can fall into that class must be 43. Any number less than 43 cannot fall into that second class. A score of 42 or a mass of 42 will fall into the first class, but 43 is the least number that can fall into the second class. Then let's look at the third class here. The third class, the lower class interval is 46. While for the fourth class, the lower class interval is 49. And for the last class there, the lower class interval is 52. So those are the various class interval. So these are the lower class interval and these are the upper class interval. So we see the lower class interval tells us the least number that can fall into a class. While the upper class interval is the opposite of the lower class what interval. The upper class interval tells us the highest number or item that can fall into a particular what class. The upper class interval tells us the what highest number or item that can fall into a particular what class. So if you look at this class now, the first class, the upper class interval is what 42. The second class, the upper class interval is what 45. The third class, the upper class interval is what 48. The fifth class, the upper class interval is 51. And the last class upper class interval is what 54. So these are the upper class interval. These are the what upper class what interval in that what table. So the upper class interval is usually on the right hand side, and it tells us the what highest number that can fall into a particular class. While these are the lower class interval, they are the words left hand side. They tell us the least number that can fall into a particular word class. So with the upper and lower class interval, let's look at the first one. The lower and upper class interval tells us that any number that must fall into this class of 40 to 42 must be within the range of 40, 41, and 42. Must be the range between what? 40, 41, and 42. So the upper class interval talks about the what? The numbers of items or the size of item that can fall into a particular what? Class. Then we have our class boundary. We have the word class boundary. The class boundary usually refers to the true class limit. The class boundary usually referred to as the true class what limit. They are usually important in telling us the true item that fall into a particular class. They define the true item that fall into a particular what class. We use the class boundary to construct histogram and cumulative frequency table. We use the word class boundary to construct histogram and not cumulative frequency table. We use it to construct the ogive with the cumulative frequency distribution curve. We use it to construct the word ogive or the cumulative frequency distribution curve, and also what histogram. So in our table here, this is the word class what boundary. And the way we have the upper class interval and the lower class interval, we also have the upper class boundary and the lower class what boundary. These are the what lower class interval. These are the lower class boundary. Then these are the upper class interval. These are the upper class what boundary. How do we obtain our class boundary? It's very, very simple. To obtain your lower class boundary, these are the lower class boundary now. To obtain this your lower class boundary, what is simply to subtract 0.5 from the lower class what interval. Let me repeat that again. To obtain your lower class boundary, this one, what is simply to subtract 0.5 from each of the lower class what interval. Let's do that. 40 minus 0.5 is equals to what? 39.5. So that's what we got here. 40 minus 0.5, we got 39.5. The same thing also applies to the other classes. To get the second class, lower class boundary, to get this one, what is simply to subtract 0.5 from 43. So 43 minus 0.5 is equal to 39.5. So that 42.5 rather is equal to 42.5. So that's what we simply do for each of the lower class boundary. So if you subtract 0.5 from this one, will give you 45.5. 49 minus 0.5 will give you what? 48.5. And 52 minus 0.5 will give you what? 51.5. Let me just do that again. To get the lower class boundary, Subtract 0.5 from the lower class interval. These are the lower class interval and these are the lower class boundary. So to get this lower class boundary, what you simply did, we subtract 0.5 from 40 and it was 39.5. 43 minus 0.5 will give us 42.5. 46 minus 0.5 will give us what? 45.5. 49 minus 0.5 will give us what? 48.5. 52 minus 0.5 will give us 51.5. So that's our what? Lower class what? Boundary. Now let's go to the upper class boundary. The upper class boundary is this is the upper class boundary, and this is the upper class what? Interval. Let me repeat myself. This is the upper class boundary, and this is the upper class what? Interval. How do we obtain the upper class boundary? To obtain the upper class boundary, we add 0.5 to the lower class what? Interval. We have what? We add what? 0.5 to the lower class what? To the upper class what? Interval. This is the upper class boundary, and this is the upper class what? Interval. For us to obtain our upper class boundary, we add 0.5 to the what? Upper class what? Interval. So 42 plus 0.5 will give you 42.5. 45 plus 0.5 will give you 45.5. 48 plus 0.5 will give you what? 48.5. 51 plus 0.5 will give us 51.5. 54 plus 0.5 will give us what? 54.5. So that's the what? Upper class what? Boundary. So what we simply did very much simple. We just add what? 0.5 to each of the upper class what? Interval, and it give us the what? Upper class what? Boundary. Then let us take a note of something very sacrosanct here. If you see, this is equal to this is also equal to this is equal to this, and this is equal to what? This. That is to show that our working is what? Correct. Whenever you look for the class boundary, the upper class boundary, let me wipe my screen. The upper class boundary of a class must be equal to the what? Lower class boundary of the preceding class. So this one must be equal to what? This. This class must be equal to what? This, the class boundary here. This class boundary must be equal to what? This class boundary. And this class boundary here must be equal to this what? Class boundary. So that's how it goes. So that is to show that our work is what? Correct. Because when we plot histogram, when we get to histogram, we see the importance of them being what? Equal. So let's go to the next concept, which talks about class size. Class what? Size. Class size simply refers to the class width. When we talk about class size, we also talk about the class width. You can usually call the class size or the class what width. It is a difference between two consecutive upper class interval or two consecutive lower class what? Interval. The class width is usually the difference between two consecutive upper class interval or two consecutive lower class what? Interval. What does the class width tell us? It tells us the number of possible items that can fall into a class. That is, from this our example, our first class is 40 to what? 42. So it tells us that 40 can fall into this class, 41 can fall into this class, and 42 also can what? Fall into this class. So you have three categories of numbers that can fall into this class: 40, 41, and 42. So we have three categories of numbers that can fall into this class. So the class size is what? 3. The class size is what? 3, because we have three categories of number that falls into the class. Let's go to the next class. The next class is the class of 43 to what? 50. Let us look at the possible categories of numbers that can fall into the class. 43 can fall into this class. 44 can fall into this class. And 45 can also fall into this word class. So the class size is what 43, 44, 45, which is what 3. There are 3 categories of numbers that can fall into this word class. Let's look at the next class. The next class, which is 46 to 48. Let's look at the categories of numbers that can fall into this class. We have 46 can enter that class. 47 can enter into that class. And 48 also can enter into this word class. So what it simply means that we have what 3 word, the class size is what 3. The class size is what 3, which means that we have 3 possible numbers that can fall into what that word class. So let me show you a shortcut of getting the class size. The class size is usually obtained the difference between 2 consecutive lower class interval or 2 consecutive upper class what interval. So these are what 2 consecutive lower class interval. 46 minus 43 is equals to what 3. So the class size is what 3, as we have seen before. Let's take another one. Let's say 42 and 45, 2 consecutive upper class interval now. 45 minus 42 is equal to what 3. So 45 minus 42 is equal to what 3. So the class size is what also 3. So you can simply do the class size by counting between the lower class interval, the upper class interval, like 40, 41, and 42. So we have what 3 categories of number that can fall into that class. So the class size is what 3. Or you can simply what subtract what 2 consecutive lower class interval or 2 consecutive upper class what interval. So what we simply do now is just to what to get it 43 minus 40 is equals to what 3. Or let's use the last two class. The last two class. 52 minus 49 is equals to 3. Or 54 minus, which is this, minus 51 is equals to what 3. So that's our word class size. It tells us the categories of numbers that can fall into the word particular class, which is usually got here by the difference between 2 consecutive lower class interval or 2 consecutive upper class word interval. Then let's proceed to the next concept that is very important: class mark. Class what? Mark. When we talk about class mark, it also refers to as the class word midpoint. We call it the class mark or the class word midpoint. It is the representative of a particular word class. Is the word representative of a particular word class? It represents the word entire word class. And how do we obtain the class mark? The class mark is the word arithmetic mean of the upper and lower class interval of a particular class. The class mark, we said it also refers to the word class midpoint and is the representative of the word entire class. For example, your class, if I am looking for somebody to represent your class, I can call the prefect to represent your class. The prefect is not like the class mark to the word class, or the school senior prefect and the assistant, it can be the word the class mark. So any item that is used to represent a class, we refer to it as the word class word mark. And in statistics too, our class mark is usually what the arithmetic mean between the upper class interval and the word lower class word interval. So this is the word first class. The lower class interval is what 40. The upper class interval is what 42. So to get the arithmetic mean is what you add both of them together and divide it by 2. So if we add both of them together, it will give us what? Let me do that again. So let's say this is the first class. We want to get the class mark. 40 plus 42 divided by what? 2 is equals to what? 82 divided by 2. So when we divide it, we have what? 41 as our what? Answer. So the class mark of that very first class is what? 41. So the very first class, the class mark is what? 41. Let's check for the second class. This is the second class. 43 plus 45 all over what? 2. That's the arithmetic mean of that class. Is equals to what? Okay, sorry. 43 plus 45 all over 2 is equals to what? 88 over 2. 88 divided by 2 is equals to what? 44, which is the same thing as for 44 here. So the class mark is what? The what? Arithmetic meaning of a particular what? Class. Let's do the first class there. Okay, the first class, what is the class size or the class interval? This is the class interval 49 to 51. So let's look for the class mark of that class. 49 plus 51 divided by 2 is equals to what? 100 divided by 2, which is equal to what? 50. So that class mark is what? 50. So that's the what? Class mark of each of the what? Class. There's a shortcut for obtaining the class mark. Let me just show you the shortcut of obtaining each of the what? Class mark. To obtain the class mark, one of the shortcuts we usually use is to what? Add the class size to the very first class. We give you the what? The next class what? Mark. Keep adding the class mark to the preceding class mark. Will be give you the next class what? Mark. Let me do that mathematical size. We say it. We have obtained this class mark by stating that 40 plus 42 divided by 2 is equals to what? 82 divided by what? 2, and it's equals to what? 41. So we have obtained the first class mark. What you simply need to do at this point, after obtaining the very first class mark, go and look for the word class size. The word class size. And I say that the class size is the difference between what? 2 consecutive upper class interval or 2 consecutive lower class what? Interval. So 43 minus 40 is equals to what? 3. So the class mark is what? The class size is what? 3. So since the class size is 3, to get our next class interval, our next class mark, add 3 to the first class what? Mark. So 41 plus 3 will give us what? 44. 44 plus 3 will give us what? 47. 47 plus 3 will give us what? 50. 53 plus 3 will give us what? 53. So that's the shortcut. So the shortcut requires you to what? After obtaining the first class what? Mark, what you simply do, keep adding what? The class size to the what? Class what? Mark. It will give you the next class what? Mark. So 43, 1 plus 3 will give us what? 44. 44 plus 3 will give us what? 47. 47 plus 3 will give us what? 50. And 50 plus 3 will give us what? 50 what? 3. So that's how to obtain our what? Class mark. So that's all for today. But before I round up my class, let me also show you something. Another, the class mark. After you have gotten your first class interval, which is this, what to do to get the next class interval? Just add the what? Lower class interval to this class. What I simply mean, add the lower class interval, add the class size to this lower class interval, will give you this one, which is 43. Add 3 to this one, will give you 46. Add 3 to this one, will give you 49. Add 3 to this one, will give you 52. Then to get the upper class interval for the next class, add 3 to 42, will give 45. Add 3 to 48, 45 will give you 48. Add 3 to 51 will give you, just like that. You keep adding it, will give you the what? next class size. So that's all for today. Thanks for being part of my class. God bless you and have a nice day.